Get her off my radio. Those were the words Lieutenant Colonel Frank Reardon said into the command net at exactly 0317 hours on a February morning in 1989, high in the mountains along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, with Soviet-trained militia closing on three sides and a DSHK heavy machine gun tearing his northern defensive line apart. Get her off my radio. She's a trainee. I don't care what she thinks she heard. He said it with absolute conviction, the kind of conviction that comes from 35 years of military service, 2 silver stars earned in the frozen hell of Korea, and the unshakable certainty that he knew exactly what women could and could not do in combat. He was wrong. 43 men nearly died because of how wrong he was. But the woman he was talking about, the one he wanted off his radio, the one whose voice he dismissed as background noise in the middle of a firefight that was about to go catastrophically sideways. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't waste a single second trying to convince him. She just picked up her rifle, climbed onto the exposed concrete roof of Relay Station Echo Ridge in the middle of incoming mortar fire, and put one round through a moving gunner at 643 meters in complete darkness. One round. The machine gun went silent. The assault broke. And every man who had spent the last 18 hours calling her a trainee, a secretary, a CIA desk jockey playing soldier, stood completely still in their fighting positions, unable to speak, unable to move, because they had just watched something impossible happen. And most of them still didn't know her name. If this story hits you somewhere deep, and I promise you it will, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this reaches. How many people need to hear what happened on that mountain when the old guard met something they never saw coming? Now settle in, because what happened to Kate Ashford in 72 hours is something you will not forget. The first thing Staff Sergeant David Blackwell said when he saw her was not hello. It was not welcome to the unit either. What David Blackwell said, standing in the doorway of the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Iron Ridge, looking at the woman sitting alone at the far end of the table with a rifle leaning against her chair and a small leather notebook open on her knee, was this: "Somebody tell me that's not our SAD augment." Nobody said anything. The room held 12 men. Most of them had been in country for 6 months. All of them had combat experience. Some of them had silver stars. One of them had a Purple Heart. And every single one of them stopped what they were doing and looked at the woman at the end of the table. She was blonde, hair tied back in a regulation bun under a patrol cap. No unit patch on her sleeve beyond rank, private first class. No combat service badge. No qualification tabs. Nothing except a name tape that read Ashford in black block letters, and the expression of someone who had been looked at with exactly this combination of doubt and dismissal many times before and had simply stopped reacting to it. Blackwell crossed the room. He was 42 years old, had been at Grenada in '83, and carried himself with the confident ease of a non-commissioned officer who knew his job and knew it well. He stopped in front of the table and looked at her directly. "You're our augment?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Transferred from where?" She paused. Half a second. Not long enough to be insubordinate, long enough to be noticeable. "Previous assignment was classified." Classified. Blackwell repeated the word the way people repeat words they don't believe. He looked around at Staff Sergeant James Fletcher, who was leaning against the wall near the map board, arms crossed. "You hear that, Fletcher? She's classified." Fletcher was 28, sharp-eyed, the kind of soldier who paid attention to details other people missed. He studied the woman for a moment, then looked back at Blackwell. "She looks about 22. "I'm 26, she said. Her voice was level. Not offended, not defensive, just correcting the record. "I finished basic training in 1983. "And since then?" Blackwell pressed. "Since then is classified." The door at the front of the room opened, and Lieutenant Colonel Frank Reardon walked in. He was impossible to miss. 6'4", 230 pounds of solid Korean War infantry frame, with a jaw that had been broken twice and healed wrong both times, giving his face a permanent expression somewhere between authority and challenge. His hair was gray at the temples. His hands were scarred. He had the posture of a man who had spent 35 years teaching younger soldiers how to stay alive in places that wanted them dead. He saw the woman at the end of the table and stopped. For 3 full seconds, he just stood there, taking her in. The lack of unit patches, the lack of qualification badges, the leather notebook, the rifle that looked like it had seen actual use, but no combat markings on the stock. Then he walked to the front of the room and set his briefing folder down on the table with the kind of controlled force that made a sound without being loud. That, he said, not looking at anyone in particular, had better not be our augment. Blackwell straightened. Sir, this is Private First Class. He glanced at her name tape. Ashford. Arrived on the supply helicopter this morning. Reardon pulled a manila folder from his briefing stack and opened it. His eyes moved across the page. Then stopped. Then moved back to the beginning and started again. Slower this time, like a man reading something he couldn't quite believe. Private First Class Kate Ashford, he read aloud. Basic training completion. Fort Jackson, November 1983. He looked up. That's it. That's the entire file. Everything else is redacted. He looked at her directly for the first time. You want to explain that to me, Private? She met his gaze without flinching. No, sir. That wasn't a request. With respect, sir, she said, and her voice carried the quiet weight of someone who had said these words before and meant them completely. It was a question, and the answer is classified. The room went very quiet. Nobody spoke to Lieutenant Colonel Frank Reardon like that. Not directly, not without preparation, and not with that particular quality of absolute calm that somehow made the words land harder than anger would have. Reardon closed the folder. He had made his decision the way experienced officers make decisions under pressure. Quickly, decisively, and sometimes incorrectly. You're on communications and secondary observation, he said. You do not engage independently. You do not leave your assigned position. You do not make any tactical decision without my direct authorization. You clear on that? Yes, sir. And keep that notebook closed during the briefing. She closed the notebook. She did not apologize for having it open. She simply closed it and waited. Reardon walked to the map board and the briefing began. And Private First Class Kate Ashford sat alone at the far end of the table and listened with the kind of attention that looks like stillness, but is actually something else entirely. The mission briefing lasted 38 minutes. Reardon stood at the map board with a laser pointer and explained the objective with the precision of a man who had done this hundreds of times and understood that clarity saved lives. Relay Post Echo Ridge, he said, the red dot moving across the topographic map, is a communications hub on the northeastern ridgeline overlooking the Khyber approach. Special Activities Division has been coordinating Stinger missile deliveries to Mujahideen forces fighting Soviet occupation. Our mission: insert, secure the relay post, hold it for 18 hours until a resupply convoy of 43 trucks clears the mountain pass and reaches friendly territory. He clicked a button and the map shifted to a satellite image. Air support is on standby but not guaranteed. The Soviets have increased cap patrols in this sector. Artillery support is available, but response time is 20 minutes minimum due to the terrain, which means we hold on our own until we don't have to anymore. He looked around the room. His gaze passed over Kate Ashford without stopping. Intel assessment characterizes the threat as low to moderate. Local militia, Soviet-trained but not Soviet-led. Hit-and-run tactics. They've been harassing supply routes but nothing sustained. We go in before first light, which keeps us under their observation window. Eastern approach is the cleanest insertion route. He turned off the laser pointer. We have one augment attached from SAD for communications and observation support. A brief nod toward the end of the table. She stays with the headquarters element. She observes and reports. That's her function. Fletcher raised his hand. Sir, what's the backup plan if the eastern approach is compromised? We don't have one, Reardon said flatly. The eastern approach is the only viable route for the equipment we're carrying. If it's compromised, we abort and extract. But Intel says it won't be. The militia doesn't have the capability to cover all the approaches simultaneously. Nobody asked Kate her name. She did not offer it. The briefing ended. The room began to empty. Reardon was the last to leave, and he stopped at the door and looked back. She was still sitting at the end of the table. Notebook reopened, writing something with the focused concentration of a person who had received a great deal of information and was now processing it in the only way that made sense to her. "Ashford," he said. She looked up. "We load up at 0300 hours. Get some rest." "Yes, sir." He left. The door closed. She turned back to her notebook. On the page was a diagram of the insertion route from the briefing map, drawn from memory with precise proportions. Beside each of the 6 approach vectors, she had noted estimated travel times, terrain elevation changes based on the satellite imagery visible on the screen, and small annotations in her own shorthand that would have been unreadable to anyone else. She was not drawing this to impress anyone. Nobody was watching. She was drawing it because she had learned, at some point in the past that her file did not discuss, that the difference between a situation you survived and a situation you did not was almost always the amount of thinking you had done before it started. She drew until she had what she needed. Then the notebook snapped shut. She picked up her rifle and went to find her bunk. She did not sleep. The insertion was clean. 4 hours of movement in the darkness, first by truck convoy to the staging area, then on foot through mountain passes that climb from 4,000 feet to nearly 7,000. The air was thin and cold. The stars were sharp overhead. The mountains rose on all sides like the walls of a cathedral built for something older and harder than prayer. Kate Ashford walked at the rear of the formation, as assigned. She carried 60 pounds of gear, radio equipment, ammunition, water, medical supplies. She did not ask for help. She did not slow down. She moved with the steady, economical pace of someone who understood that endurance was a weapon and fatigue was the enemy. 2 hours into the march, Reardon called a halt. The formation took a knee, weapons out, scanning. The discipline was good. These were experienced soldiers who knew how to move in hostile territory. Reardon moved down the line, checking positions, checking soldiers. When he reached Kate, he stopped. "You good, Ashford?" "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a moment, studying her in the darkness. She wasn't breathing hard, wasn't showing strain. The 60 pounds of gear sat on her frame like it belonged there. "You ever do mountain work before?" "My training record is classified, sir." His jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I'm authorized to give, sir." He stared at her for another 3 seconds. Then he moved on. Fletcher, who was positioned 2 meters ahead of her, glanced back. He'd heard the exchange. In the darkness, she could see the question in his eyes. Not hostile, just curious, trying to figure out what didn't fit. The march continued. At the 4-hour mark, something changed. The birds stopped singing. Not all at once, the way birds stop when a shot is fired, or a sudden loud noise shatters the night. This was gradual, progress, a slow silencing that moved from north to south along a line roughly parallel to their route of march. Kate heard it and said nothing for 12 minutes. She was calculating, watching the tree line, watching the way the darkness moved differently in certain sectors, watching the angle of the terrain features and the likely observation points, and the small, almost invisible signs that something was out there that wasn't supposed to be. After 12 minutes, she moved forward in the column and touched Blackwell's shoulder. He turned. "What?" "Birds stopped on our left flank," she said quietly. "Started about 12 minutes ago. Progressive pattern from north to south. Something's pacing us." Blackwell looked at the darkness to their left. Listened. He had good ears. He could hear what she was talking about, the absence of sound where sound should be. "Could be wind shift," he said. "Temperature change." "It's 0530 hours," she said. "Temperature hasn't shifted yet, and the pattern is too linear for natural causes." "Wildlife. This area has mountain goats, wild boar. Ground movement from animals doesn't create linear progression. This is tracking us. Left flank, elevated position, approximately 200 meters out." Blackwell studied her in the darkness. The unproven augment with the blank record, offering a tactical assessment based on bird behavior. He could see exactly where this was going to go if he brought it to Reardon. "Stay in position," he said. She went back to her position at the rear of the column. Fletcher was waiting. He'd seen the exchange. "What was that about?" he whispered. "Birds," she said. "Birds?" "They stopped. Left flank. Something's out there." Fletcher listened. After a moment, he heard it too, the unnatural quiet. "You sure?" "Yes." "How sure?" She looked at him. In the darkness, her eyes were impossible to read, but the certainty in her voice was absolute. Sure enough that I'm going to keep watching our left flank for the rest of the march. And if you're right, then we'll know soon enough. She was right. 45 minutes later, the forward element almost walked into a prepared observation position. It was Blackwell who found it, a hollow in the undergrowth, compressed grass, 2 empty water bottles, cigarette butts still faintly warm, Soviet manufacture, recently vacated, less than an hour old. Reardon crouched over the position. Blackwell crouched beside him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Blackwell said very quietly, "She called this, the augment, 45 minutes ago, said something was pacing us on the left flank from bird patterns." Reardon looked at the cigarette butts, looked at the compressed grass, looked at the sight lines from the position, which covered the exact route they'd been traveling. "Bird patterns," he said. "Yes, sir." Reardon stood up. He looked toward the rear of the column where Kate Ashford was standing, her rifle at low ready, her head on a slow pivot, scanning the surrounding terrain with the methodical attention of someone who never stopped working. He looked at the observation position. He looked back at her. "How did she know?" he said to no one in particular. Nobody had an answer. He ordered the column forward, adjusted route, tighter formation, and said nothing directly to her. But Fletcher, falling back to his position near her, caught her eye and gave her a single, brief nod. She acknowledged it with nothing. What she did was reach into her pocket, open her notebook to a fresh page, and write in small, careful letters, "Left flank observation post confirmed. Soviet reconnaissance element active. Echo Ridge is not a surprise. They know we're coming." She wrote it down because writing things down was how she ensured that what she knew became part of the record. Because she had learned, in the years that her file didn't discuss, that the truth had a tendency to get lost in the space between what happened and what people chose to remember. She tucked the notebook away and kept moving. They reached relay station Echo Ridge at 7:20 hours as the sun came fully over the mountain peaks and the temperature began its daily climb from freezing to merely cold. The relay station was a concrete structure on a low ridge, surrounded by enough open ground to make the approach routes visible in every direction, and enough exposed terrain to make it exactly the kind of position that looked defensible, until someone with real experience looked at it from the outside and understood what a nightmare it actually was. Reardon set the perimeter, fighting positions every 40 meters, interlocking fields of fire, radio array inside with the headquarters element. He moved through the setup with the efficiency of a man who had done this so many times that the muscle memory was deeper than conscious thought. Kate carried the communications pack to the interior of the relay structure and began assembling the encrypted satellite uplink. It took her 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Reardon came to check on her progress and stopped in the doorway. She was already done. The equipment was online. The encryption protocols were running. The status lights showed green across the board. "You've done that before," he said. "Yes, sir." He walked closer, looked at the setup. The standard assembly time for this particular system, even for trained communications specialists, was between 8 and 12 minutes. She'd cut that by more than half. The manual assembly takes most comm specialists 8 to 10 minutes. "Yes, sir." He looked at her. She looked back. No pride, no performance, just the flat acknowledgement of someone stating a fact. "Where did you train?" "My training record is classified, sir." He left. She sat beside the radio and began monitoring the battalion net. Around her, the platoon settled into the routine of a defensive position. Weapon checks, position improvements, ration consumption. The slow burn of waiting. The temperature climbed. The mountains pressed against the perimeter. And somewhere out in that vast expanse of rock and snow and hidden approaches, something was moving that the intel briefing had characterized as low to moderate threat, hit-and-run tactics, nothing sustained. Kate opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "They're coming. Bigger force than anticipated. Estimate 0300 to 0330 hours. Tonight, 4-element assault. Echo Ridge is the objective, not a harassment target." She wrote it because she had been monitoring the Soviet militia frequencies for the last 2 hours on a secondary receiver that nobody had told her to set up, and nobody knew she had. She wrote it because she spoke enough Russian to understand tactical coordination when she heard it. She wrote it because in 6 years of being buried, dismissed, and reduced to a blank file, she had learned that the only person you could absolutely count on to save your life was yourself. And she wrote it because 43 trucks full of Stinger missiles were counting on this relay station staying operational for 18 more hours. And if it fell, every single one of those convoys would be a sitting target for Soviet attack helicopters that would turn a supply run into a massacre. Her hand closed the leather cover. She put it in her pocket and waited. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened, and the clock counted down toward a darkness that would bring fire. Sergeant Elizabeth Harlow brought Kate water at mid-morning. She sat down across from her in the shade of the relay structure's eastern wall, her medical pack still strapped to her back, dust on her boots from checking the perimeter positions. She was 30 years old, had Scottish blood in her veins, and a direct way of speaking that came from 10 years of dealing with wounded soldiers who needed honesty more than comfort. "I've been asking around," she said. "Nobody knows who you are. Nobody's heard your name before." Which usually means one of two things. Kate looked at her. Which two things? Either you're exactly what your file says, a private who got here through some administrative shuffle that nobody can explain, or you're something else entirely. And whatever that something else is, it's the kind of thing that gets files redacted. Kate took a drink of water, said nothing. "I also think," Harlow continued carefully, "that someone who can read a patrol route from bird silence and assemble encrypted comms in under 4 minutes didn't get here by accident, and didn't spend 4 years in an administrative office." She paused, studied Kate's face. "You knew about that observation post before we found it. Not suspected, knew." "I had a strong indicator," Kate said. "You had certainty." And the colonel dismissed it. Harlow leaned forward slightly. "And now we're sitting in a position that a Soviet reconnaissance element has already scoped out, holding a relay post that they know we're in. And our air support is on standby, not guaranteed. And our artillery is 20 minutes out." Kate said nothing. "Tell me I'm wrong," Harlow said. Kate picked up her radio handset and checked the battalion frequency. Then she set it down and looked at Harlow with those gray eyes that gave nothing away and said everything anyway. "Get some rest, Sergeant. You're going to need it." Harlow's jaw tightened. She stood up, started to walk away. Then she stopped, turned back. "If you see something coming," she said, "tell me. Even if the colonel dismisses it, tell me." Kate looked at her for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "I already see it. The question is whether I'll have time to do anything about it before it arrives." Harlow stood there for a long moment with the expression of a woman who has just been told something she already suspected but hoped was wrong. Then she went to check her medical supplies, which was the right thing to do because at 1400 hours that afternoon, everything Kate had been afraid of started to become real. Staff Sergeant James Fletcher found it. He wasn't supposed to be in the administrative network. The tactical radio array that Kate had assembled was encrypted for operational communications, not personnel records. But the encryption protocol ran through a shared node with the wider CIA database, and someone at headquarters had made a configuration error 6 weeks ago that nobody had caught. And when Fletcher entered a search query using Kate's name, not because he was trying to violate protocol, but because he was the kind of soldier who needed to understand the people he was fighting beside, he got something back. Not much, fragments, pieces of a file that had been redacted so thoroughly that reading it was like trying to reconstruct a photograph from a handful of scattered pixels. But pixels, if you look at them long enough, tell you something. He read what was visible for 11 minutes. Then he sat very still for another 3. Then he went to find Blackwell. "Sergeant," he said, and his voice carried a weight that made Blackwell set down the ammunition he was counting and give Fletcher his full attention. "You need to see this." Blackwell read it standing up, which was how he read everything. His eyes moved across the screen fast, then slowed, then stopped, then went back to the beginning and started over. Call sign, Sierra Ghost. The rest was black, redacted, gone. But what wasn't black assembled itself into a shape that Blackwell could read despite the gaps. The way you can read a sentence with missing letters if the sentence is familiar enough in its construction. Special Reconnaissance. Grenada, October 1983. Team leader killed in action. 8 operators surrounded. Junior operator assumed command. 14 hours under sustained fire. 37 confirmed enemy kills. Thinking withdrawal. All personnel extracted. 0 friendly casualties. Commendation recommended. Medal of Honor consideration. Investigation launched. Actions necessary for team survival, but exceeding parameters of mission authorization. Rank reduction. Reassignment. Records classified. Blackwell set the tablet down. He looked across the compound toward the relay structure where Kate was sitting beside the radio, monitoring frequencies, her notebook open on her knee. Sierra Ghost, Fletcher said quietly. That's a special activities call sign. That's not regular Army. That's not even regular Special Forces. She was 20 years old, Blackwell said. His voice was flat, processing. According to the basic training date, 20 years old when Grenada happened. A 20-year-old woman pulled 8 operators out of a compromised position after the team leader was killed. Held for 14 hours. 37 confirmed kills. Then they investigated her for it. Blackwell was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that isn't silence, but is the sound of a mind working through something it resisted understanding, because understanding meant admitting how wrong the initial assessment had been. The commendation was recommended and then pulled, Fletcher continued. The investigation wasn't about what she did wrong. Look at the language. Actions necessary for team survival, but exceeding mission parameters. They punished her for saving her team. Or they punished her for disobeying orders. She disobeyed orders to save her team. There's a difference. I know there's a difference. Blackwell's voice had an edge in it that Fletcher had rarely heard. But the people who buried her file didn't see it that way. He picked up the tablet and read the fragments a third time. He was looking specifically for the commendation language, the part that described what she had actually done in those 14 hours before the investigation decided what to make of it. It was there, barely. 3 words that had survived the redaction process. Extraordinary tactical instinct. He set the tablet down again. Why didn't she tell us? He said, not accusatory, genuinely asking. Because the deal she took stripped her of everything, Fletcher said. If she starts telling people who she is, the classified nature of the operation gets exposed. Her file gets reopened. And the people who buried her 6 years ago find out she's not staying buried. Blackwell looked toward the relay structure again. Kate had her head down, writing something in her notebook. The same methodical concentration she brought to everything, like she was documenting something that needed to be remembered because memory alone wasn't reliable enough. So she sits here, Blackwell said slowly, with a blank record, no call sign, no qualifications listed, and she does the job anyway. Every time, without being asked, without authorization, without recognition. Yes, Sergeant. Blackwell was quiet for another long moment. Then he picked up his rifle and walked toward the relay structure. She heard him coming. She always heard things coming. She didn't look up from the radio until he was 3 feet away. Then she looked up with the same expression she'd had since the briefing that morning. That careful, calibrated stillness that he now understood was not coldness, but the face of someone who had learned to preserve themselves by giving nothing away to people who hadn't earned it yet. Sierra Ghost, he said. Something moved in her eyes, quick, gone before he could name it. Where did you find that? She said. Her voice was level, but not quite as controlled as before. Network configuration error. Fletcher found the fragments. She looked past him toward where Fletcher was standing near the perimeter, watching. Then she looked back at Blackwell. I'm not going to pretend I'm not 4 hours late to this conversation, Blackwell said. I should have listened to you this morning. The observation post, the bird patterns, you were right about all of it. You had no reason to trust my assessment. I had exactly one reason. You were giving it to me, and I chose not to use it because your file said you were nobody, and I believed the file instead of what I was seeing. He paused. That was a leadership failure. Mine. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you moved your team correctly when we found the observation post. You adjusted the route. You tightened the formation. You did exactly what needed to be done when the evidence became visible. That's good leadership, Sergeant. We held the position because you identified the threat before it became critical. And we're still holding it because you acted on that information once you had it. She met his eyes directly. Don't discount that. Good leaders use the information they're given. You did. Blackwell had been in the military for 20 years. He had been told he was good at his job by commanding officers, by peers, by soldiers who had served under him. He had never been told he was good at his job by someone in the middle of explaining how he'd failed, in a way that was so precisely honest and so completely without personal agenda that it landed harder than any commendation he'd ever received. They're going to come back, he said. Yes. When? Tonight, before dawn. Bigger force than the intel assessment predicted. They know our strength now. They know the observation post was compromised, which means they know we found it. They'll come with more, from more directions, with better coordination. How long do we have? 3 hours, maybe 4. Blackwell processed this. You've been monitoring their frequency. Yes. You speak Russian. Enough of it. He stared at her. Another impossible data point added to an accumulating list of impossible data points. What are they saying? They're coordinating a 4-element assault, north, east, southeast, and southwest, simultaneous. The southwestern element is going to have anti-tank capability, RPG teams, probably in pairs. They want to collapse the structure, not just suppress the perimeter. The relay station is the target, not the platoon. If the structure goes down, the convoy loses its navigation relay. 43 trucks full of Stinger missiles become sitting targets on an open mountain road with no communication support and no warning when the Soviet attack helicopters show up. The weight of it landed on Blackwell fully, the full shape of what was happening, what this relay station actually meant, what the next 4 hours actually meant. Tell me what you need, he said. She looked at him. For the first time since she had stepped off the transport helicopter and walked into a briefing room full of men who didn't know her name and didn't want to, something shifted in her face. Not gratitude exactly, something quieter than that. The expression of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just been offered, for the first time, a hand. I need you to tell Colonel Reardon, she said. All of it. The frequency intercept, the 4-element assault, the timeline, the anti-tank capability, everything. He's going to ask how you know. Then tell him the truth. The truth is going to open questions about your file. Let it open them. She looked past him toward the mountains, where the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. Sergeant, in about 3.5 hours, none of that is going to matter. The only thing that's going to matter is whether this relay station is still standing when the sun comes up. Everything else is noise. Blackwell nodded once. He stood up and started moving, calling Reardon on the tactical net. Kate watched him go. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote, Blackwell knows. Fletcher knows. Harlow suspects. Reardon about to find out. The file is opening whether I want it to or not, but the mission is still the mission. 43 trucks, 18 hours, that's what matters. She secured the notebook and settled back to wait. Reardon arrived at the relay structure 6 minutes later. He came through the entrance with the controlled urgency of a commanding officer who has just received information that doesn't match his initial intelligence assessment and needs to verify it immediately. He looked at Kate. She was still sitting beside the radio, headset on, monitoring. Ashford, he said, step outside. She removed the headset, secured the radio, and followed him out into the compound. He walked 20 meters from the structure, far enough that the conversation would be private, close enough that he could still see the perimeter. He turned to face her. Blackwell says you've been monitoring Soviet militia frequencies. Yes, sir. He says you speak Russian. Enough of it, sir. Enough to decode tactical coordination? Yes, sir. Reardon's jaw worked. She could see him processing this, stacking it against everything else he'd learned about her in the last 12 hours. The bird patterns, the observation post, the communications assembly time, and now this. Why didn't you tell me this at the briefing? Because you didn't ask, sir, and because my language qualifications are part of my classified training record. Your classified training record. He said it the way people say things they're starting to understand but don't like understanding. Sierra Ghost. That's your actual call sign, isn't it? She didn't answer immediately. Fletcher must have shown him the fragments. She'd known this moment was coming since the network error was discovered. She'd known it would eventually surface. She just hadn't known it would happen in the middle of a defensive position 4 hours before an assault. That was my call sign, she said carefully. 6 years ago. It's not current. Because they buried you. Because I made a choice that conflicted with mission parameters, sir. And the people who ran that operation decided the best way to handle it was to make me disappear. You saved 8 operators in Grenada. I disobeyed a direct order to observe and report. The team leader was killed. I assumed command without authorization. I engaged enemy forces in a manner that exceeded the mission scope, and I brought everyone home. She paused. The investigation decided that the last part didn't justify the first 3 parts. Reardon looked at her for a long moment. 35 years of military service. Korea. Classified operations that had no names and left no records. He had seen bureaucracy eat good soldiers before. He had seen politics destroy careers. But he had never stood 3 feet away from someone who had been deliberately erased and was still standing. Blackwell says you're predicting a 4-element assault. Tonight, before dawn. Yes, sir. Based on frequency intercepts. Based on tactical coordination chatter that I've been monitoring for the last 6 hours. They're not hiding their traffic very well, which means they either don't think we have anyone listening who speaks the language, or they don't care because they believe their numbers advantage is overwhelming. What are the numbers? I estimate 40 to 50 fighters, Soviet-trained, experienced. They're bringing RPG teams for the southwestern approach, heavy machine gun for mobile fire support, and they're planning to hit all 4 sides simultaneously to prevent us from reinforcing weak points. Intel said low to moderate threat, hit and run tactics. Intel was wrong, sir. She said it without satisfaction, without vindication, just stating a fact. This isn't harassment, this is elimination. They need this relay station offline before those Stinger missiles reach the Mujahideen. If those missiles get delivered, the Soviet air superiority in this sector collapses. They'll do whatever it takes to stop that. Reardon turned away from her and looked at the perimeter, looked at the mountains rising on all sides, looked at the relay structure that was supposed to hold for 18 hours, and was now looking at 4 hours until it faced an assault force 3 times larger than anticipated. He turned back. What do you need? The question landed between them with the weight of everything it implied. Not what do you think? Not what would you recommend? What do you need? The question of a commander who has stopped dismissing and started listening. I need you to reposition the northern team 15 meters east, she said. The current position is too exposed to enfilade fire from the high ground. I need Blackwell covering the southwestern approach because he adjusts fast under pressure, and the RPG teams are going to create a lot of confusion when they open up. I need Harlow and her team on the southeastern approach with strict orders not to move regardless of what's happening elsewhere, because that's where the real assault is going to come from, not the north. You're saying the north is a feint. I'm saying the north is going to be loud and visible and exactly what you expect to see, which is why the real breakthrough is going to come from the southeast, where the terrain is difficult and the approach seems unlikely. Soviet doctrine, feint heavy, breakthrough light. Reardon processed this. Everything she was saying contradicted his own tactical instincts, contradicted 35 years of experience, contradicted the way he had been trained to read a defensive position. But she had been right about the observation post. She had been right about the birds. She had been right about the assembly time and the frequency intercepts and every single impossible thing she had claimed to be able to do. You've studied Soviet tactical doctrine, he said. I've fought against Soviet-trained forces, sir. Grenada. The Cubans were using Soviet doctrine, Soviet weapons, Soviet coordination methods. I learned it by surviving it. He nodded slowly. Once. Where do you need to be? With the radio, sir. Monitoring their frequencies, tracking their coordination, feeding you information in real time. Not on a rifle. Not unless you authorize it, sir. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see the calculation in his face. The woman with the blank file and the impossible skills and the classified past that kept surfacing in fragments. The woman who had just told him his defensive plan was wrong and his intelligence assessment was compromised and his perimeter needed to be reorganized in the next 3 hours or people were going to die. Make it happen, he said. All of it. Northern reposition. Blackwell, southwest. Harlow, southeast with orders to hold regardless. And you stay on that radio. If their coordination changes, if their timeline shifts, if you hear anything that matters, you tell me immediately. Not Blackwell, not Fletcher. Me. Directly. Clear? Yes, sir. He started to walk away. Then he stopped and turned back. Ashford. Sir. When this is over, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about what happened in Grenada and what's been happening since. But right now I need you to know something. He paused. I dismissed you this morning. I dismissed your assessment. I treated you like an administrative inconvenience. That was wrong. And if we survive the next 12 hours, it's because you were right and I was smart enough to eventually listen. You're listening now, sir. That's what matters. Is it enough? She looked at him directly. It's going to have to be, sir, because 3 hours from now, the listening part is over and the fighting part begins. And when that happens, the only thing that's going to matter is whether we're all on the same page or not. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded and walked away, already calling positions on the radio, already reorganizing the perimeter with the precise, unhurried efficiency of a commander who had stopped fighting the information he had and started using it. Kate went back to the relay structure, sat down beside the radio, put the headset back on, and listened to the Soviet militia frequencies coordinate the assault that was going to determine whether 43 trucks full of missiles that could change the course of a war ever reached the people who needed them. The sun dropped toward the horizon. The shadows lengthened. The temperature began its evening fall toward freezing. And somewhere out in those mountains, in positions that Kate was tracking through intercepted radio traffic and tactical patterns she had learned by surviving people who tried to kill her, something was moving toward them in the darkness. She heard it all. Every transmission, every coordination sequence, every unit acknowledgement. She wrote it all down in her notebook. Timestamps, grid references, unit designations. And she waited for the moment when talk would stop and fire would start, and every single decision made in the next 4 hours would be measured in the spaces between life and death. The attack came at 03:17 hours, exactly when Kate said it would. Not approximately, exactly. The first mortar round landed at the northern perimeter at 03:17 by Blackwell's watch, and he checked it specifically because he wanted to know, because knowing felt important in a way he couldn't fully articulate but understood in his chest. She had told them 0300 to 0330. She had told them 4 elements. She had told them the southwestern approach would carry the RPG teams, and the southeastern approach would be the real assault, and the northern contact would be the loudest thing they'd ever heard, but not the thing that would kill them. She had told them all of it 3 hours ago, in the quiet beside the radio array, and every single thing she said was now happening in real time around him, with the terrible precision of a prediction that had wished it was wrong. Reardon's voice hit the radio net immediately. All positions, contact north and east simultaneous. Return fire, controlled bursts. Southwest, watch for RPG signatures. Blackwell was already facing southwest. He had been facing southwest for 20 minutes, ever since the temperature dropped and the wind shifted, and something in the way the darkness sat against the mountain slope changed in a manner he wouldn't have noticed 4 days ago and couldn't stop noticing now. She had trained his awareness without meaning to. Proximity to someone who heard everything eventually sharpened your own senses. It was involuntary. It happened the way your eyes adjusted to darkness when you stopped trying to force them. The first RPG team opened up from the southwest at 0318. The round went high, impacted against the relay structure's exterior wall, blew a chunk of concrete the size of a truck tire into the air, and sent a pressure wave across the interior that knocked the radio equipment sideways and filled the air with dust and the smell of explosive residue. Blackwell did not chase the fire. He counted to 2, exactly as she had told him to do, and shifted his optic 40 meters left of the first team's position, and he found them on the first sweep. Two figures in a prepared hide, the second gunner just raising his launcher, the loader beside him feeding the round. He fired 4 times. Center mass. The way he'd been trained. The way he'd done it for 20 years. The second team went down before the launcher came fully up. Southwest RPG Team 2 is down, he reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. First team is repositioning east, approximately 60 meters. Copy, Reardon said. North position is taking heavy fire. We've got a breach developing on the left side of the arc. Then a new voice came on the net. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who had been monitoring air support channels and was now trying to make sense of a tactical situation that had gone from quiet to catastrophic in under 90 seconds. I need tactical options right now, Hayes said, his voice tight. Northern breach is widening. If they get through the arc, we lose the structure. Silence on the net for 1 full second. The kind of silence that happens when everyone is waiting for someone specific to speak. Then Kate's voice, flat and clear through the radio static. Hayes, pull the northern left element back to the secondary sandbag line. Don't try to hold the forward position. Let them advance 10 meters into the gap, then light the gap from both sides. You have crossfire coverage from northeast and northwest simultaneously. Use it. Hayes said nothing for 2 seconds. Kate had never spoken to him directly before this moment. He didn't know her voice, didn't know her call sign, didn't know anything about her except that she was supposed to be handling communications, not giving tactical directions to a superior officer in the middle of a firefight. Sir, Reardon said, and his voice carried something that wasn't quite urgency and wasn't quite a plea, but was somewhere between the two. Do it. Execute, Hayes said. The northern left element pulled back. The Soviet assault team, seeing the withdrawal, advanced into the gap with the confidence of fighters who had just forced a retreat and believed momentum was on their side. Then both flanking positions opened up simultaneously. The gap became a killing ground. The assault team's momentum collapsed completely within 40 seconds. 3 fighters down, 4 more pinned. The rest pulling back in disarray, their coordination broken by walking into a trap they hadn't seen coming. From the roof of the relay structure, Kate watched the flanks work and was already looking elsewhere. She had climbed up here 90 seconds ago, in the first moment of the assault, moving through the compound in the darkness with the rifle slung across her back and the radio headset still on, tracking the Soviet coordination frequencies even as she repositioned herself to where she could see what needed to be seen. The northern breach was solved. The eastern suppression fire was heavy but manageable. Exactly the pattern she'd heard described on the intercepts, designed to keep heads down and attention focused forward. The southwestern RPG threat was reduced to 1 team now repositioning, exactly as Soviet doctrine dictated, 40 meters east of their original hide. These were problems that had solutions, and the solutions were being executed by soldiers who had finally stopped questioning her assessments and started implementing them. But what she was watching, what she had been watching since the moment she climbed onto this roof, was the southeastern approach. The one Hayes' original briefing had characterized as secondary. The one that the Soviet frequency traffic had mentioned last, almost as an afterthought, in a way that had bothered her since she first heard it 3 hours ago. Because careful planners didn't mention important things last. They mentioned them last specifically because they didn't want you thinking about them until it was too late to adjust. She keyed her radio. Reardon, southeastern approach. It's not secondary, it's the main effort. Reardon's voice came back immediately, managing 3 simultaneous fires, his attention divided between the northern position that had just executed the crossfire trap and the eastern suppression and the western perimeter that was reporting movement but no contact yet. A full assault element, 15 to 18 fighters, had closed to 60 meters under cover of the diversionary fires from every other direction and was now hitting the smallest, least reinforced section of the defensive perimeter with everything they had. Harlow was there. Reardon had put Harlow there because Kate had said, Harlow doesn't move, and Harlow didn't move. But Harlow also couldn't hold 60 meters of perimeter against 18 fighters alone, and she had 4 soldiers with her and the math was not working. Southeast is compromised, Harlow's voice on the net, controlled and professional, and carrying underneath it the very specific tone of someone who is telling you they need help without saying the words. I have 4 effective, taking direct fire from multiple angles. I cannot hold this position. All available elements shift to southeast support, Hayes said immediately. Negative, Kate's voice cut across the transmission, sharp and absolute. If you shift from north and east, you open those arcs for re-exploitation. They want you to shift. That's the entire point. The southeastern assault is designed to pull your reserves and reopen the northern breach. Dead air. 3 seconds of it. 3 seconds in a firefight is an eternity. Then Hayes said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there before, something raw and genuine. Then what do I do? The question was real, unguarded. He was not asking rhetorically. He was asking because he genuinely did not know. And she did. And he had finally, in the middle of everything that mattered most, stopped pretending otherwise. Hold north and east with minimum effective strength, Kate said. Give me Harlow's grid and cover me. Cover you where? She was already moving. She came off the roof differently than she had climbed it. Faster. Lower. She hit the ground and moved southeast at a run that stayed beneath the incoming fire through a geometry that she calculated instinctively, reading the angle of the muzzle flashes and staying out of their convergence zones with the spatial awareness of someone who had done this before, in mountains and jungles, in places her file didn't list, but her nightmares sometimes did. Fletcher saw her go. He grabbed his radio. She's moving to southeast. Somebody cover her left approach. On it, a voice said. Private Garrett Brennan, North position, who had called her a CIA secretary on the insertion, and who had never spoken directly to her since, who now shifted his fire left without being told what she was doing or why, simply because Fletcher had said, cover her, and Brennan had seen what she could do, and that was enough. She reached Harlow's position in 40 seconds. Harlow looked at her with the expression of someone who has been holding a door against a flood and has just been joined by someone with a better plan. How many effective? Kate said, dropping into cover beside her. 4. Aldridge is down, leg wound, still conscious. Kowalski took shrapnel to the shoulder, but he's still firing. The other 2 are solid. Kowalski keeps firing. Aldridge calls targets from the ground if he can see them. You and your 2 effective take the right arc. Standard firing positions. I take the left arc alone. Harlow stared at her. You'll be exposed to the entire assault element by yourself. On my first shot, Kate said, not looking at her, her eyes already tracking movement in the darkness 60 meters out. Everyone shifts fire to the right arc. All of you. Make them think the left arc is completely open. That will draw them straight toward the opening, which puts them in a compressed kill zone against the right side positions, and leaves you alone against, on my shot, Kate said, not before. Harlow looked at her for 1 full second. Then she looked at her soldiers and said, you heard her. On her shot, everyone shifts right. Commit to the right arc completely. Hold until I give the order otherwise. Kate found her first target at 43 meters. The assault element's fire team leader, identifiable by the way he was directing the others, by the slight elevation of his position, by the pattern of his movement between firing bursts. She waited for him to commit to his next advance, waited for the moment when his weight shifted forward and his attention focused on the position he was moving toward. She fired. Shift right, Harlow said immediately. The entire southeastern arc shifted right. Every muzzle flash from the defensive position moved right simultaneously, and the assault element, reading that shift as an opening on the left side, as a weakness to exploit, pushed left directly into the space that appeared empty, and was not. Kate fired 6 times in 9 seconds, not fast, not rushed. Each round placed with the economy of someone who understood that ammunition was finite and missing was a word she had spent years making irrelevant. 6 rounds, 5 targets down. 1 round that went wide by 3 inches because the target moved at the last instant, and she corrected immediately with the 7th round and put him down before he could process what was happening. The southeastern assault broke, not retreated, broke. The difference between an organized withdrawal and a rout is cohesion. And what Kate had just done to their fire team leader and 5 of their most aggressive fighters in 9 seconds had shattered whatever cohesion they'd brought to the fight. The entire perimeter went quiet within 90 seconds of the southeastern collapse. First the southeast, pulling back in disorder. Then the north, sensing the shift in momentum, making the professional decision to withdraw rather than commit more forces to a position that was clearly not going to crack the way they'd planned. Then the east, losing their suppression fire purpose when the southern pressure they were supposed to be supporting disappeared into the darkness. The Soviet militia force, which had planned for a defensive position that would crumble under coordinated pressure and had instead found one that refused to follow the script, made the tactically sound choice to preserve their remaining strength rather than feed more people into a fight that was no longer going their way. The darkness received them. The mountain was quiet again. Real quiet this time. Not the held-breath quiet between contacts, but the silence of a firefight that had ended, at least for now. Harlow looked at Kate. Her face was doing several things simultaneously, processing what she had just witnessed, trying to reconcile it with everything she thought she knew about combat and capability and what was possible for one person to accomplish in 9 seconds with 7 rounds. 6 shots, she said. 7, Kate corrected, already moving toward Aldridge. I missed the 4th and corrected with the 5th. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th were clean. You counted the miss. I always count the misses. Harlow opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing proportionate to say. She had been in combat before. She had trained with some of the best soldiers in the military. What she had just watched happen 6 feet to her left was not a category of things she had a framework for. Aldridge needs immediate attention, Kate said, kneeling beside the wounded soldier. That leg wound is worse than it looks. Femoral artery is compromised. He's got maybe 10 minutes before blood loss becomes critical. She was already applying pressure, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done field medicine under fire before. Kowalski's shoulder needs packing before he loses enough blood to go into shock, but he's stable for now. Get me a proper medical kit, and I can keep them both alive until we can get a medevac. Harlow grabbed her medical pack and dropped beside Kate. Together they worked Aldridge's leg wound, Kate's hands steady and sure, talking to the wounded soldier in a voice that was calm and low and carried no trace of the violence she had just executed 60 meters away. Stay with me, she said to Aldridge, who was 22 years old and gray-faced with blood loss and fear. You're not done yet. You've got a long life ahead of you, and this is just a bad day in the middle of it. Stay awake. What did you... Aldridge managed, his voice weak. What did you just do out there? My job, Kate said, tying off the field dressing with precise movements. Same as you did yours by calling those targets even with a round through your leg. Now stay awake and keep breathing. That's your job for the next 10 minutes. Reardon arrived 30 seconds later. He took in the southeastern position with the methodical assessment of a commander doing damage control. The 4 soldiers at their posts, Aldridge on the ground with Kate and Harlow working his wound, the assault element's bodies visible in the approaches where they had fallen. He stood very still for a moment. 7 shots, Fletcher said from behind him. Fletcher had materialized from the northern position without anyone noticing, the way people moved after adrenaline started dropping and the immediate crisis had passed. She moved to the position under fire, reorganized the defensive line in about 15 seconds, and broke the assault. 6 confirmed hits out of 7 rounds fired. Reardon looked at Kate. She was still working Aldridge's wound, not looking up, her hands red with blood, her rifle leaning against the sandbag wall where she'd set it after the last shot. The convoy, she said without turning around, without pausing in her work. Did we maintain radio contact with battalion? Throughout, Reardon said, and his voice carried something that might have been respect, or might have been the beginning of understanding, or might have been both. The relay is operational. The convoy has continuous navigation data. Then the mission holds, Kate said. She tied off the final bandage and sat back, checking her work with the critical eye of someone who knew that field medicine was the difference between a soldier who went home and a soldier who didn't. Get medevac on the net. Aldridge's leg is stabilized, but he needs a surgeon within 2 hours. Kowalski can wait longer, but not indefinitely. Reardon got on the radio. Hayes appeared at the southeastern perimeter entrance a moment later, and he stopped when he saw what was there to be seen. The defensive position that had held against overwhelming force, the wounded being treated, the tactical situation that had been on the verge of catastrophic failure and was now simply another problem being managed. He looked at Kate. She was helping Aldridge sit upright, one hand steady on his back, talking to him in that same calm voice about staying conscious and breathing deeply and thinking about what he was going to do when he got home. "Private First Class Ashford," Hayes said. She looked up at him. Her face was streaked with dust and blood that wasn't hers. Her eyes were as gray and unreadable as they had been in the briefing room 12 hours ago. "I owe you an apology," Hayes said. "I ignored everything you told me this morning. The observation post, the northern assault direction, the southeastern main effort. I dismissed your assessments because I didn't believe your capability matched your rank." "You acted on the information when it mattered, sir," Kate said. "When I gave you the crossfire trap option for the northern position, you executed it correctly. That's command under pressure. That's what held the arc." Hayes shook his head slowly. "You're very generous to a man who spent 12 hours treating you like a liability." "I'm accurate, sir," Kate said. Generous and accurate aren't always the same thing. Something shifted in Hayes's expression then. Not just respect, something closer to the feeling of having been seen clearly by someone who had no reason to be kind about it and was choosing kindness anyway. "Sierra Ghost," he said quietly. He had heard Fletcher use the call sign in the position reports during the fight. He'd said nothing then. He was saying it now because some things needed to be said in daylight, in the space between the crisis and the aftermath, before the paperwork started and the language of reports reduced everything to categories that didn't fit. She looked at him steadily. "That call sign is 6 years old, sir." "Is it?" She didn't answer. She stood up, checked her rifle, and looked toward the relay structure where the radio array was still transmitting, still feeding navigation data to 43 vehicles moving through mountain passes that were clear and open because this position had held. "I'm going back to the radio," she said. "We're still on mission. 16 hours until the convoy clears the pass. The militia that just withdrew is going to regroup and reassess. They might try again before dawn, or they might wait until we're fatigued. Either way, someone needs to be monitoring their frequencies." She walked away from both of them, through the southeastern position, past the soldiers who moved aside without being told to, past Brennan, who had covered her left flank without knowing why, and who now stood with an expression of someone processing the answer to a question he hadn't known to ask. She passed him close enough to speak. "Good left coverage," she said. "Thank you." He said nothing, but he watched her go with his jaw slightly loose and his rifle held at his side. And when Fletcher appeared beside him a moment later, all Brennan could manage was, "She knew. She knew everything." "Yeah," Fletcher said, watching her disappear into the relay structure. "She knew all of it from the beginning." Brennan looked at the relay structure, at the damage from the RPG impact that had blown a chunk out of the wall, but left the interior intact. At the single light visible through the entrance, where Kate was already back at the radio, already working the mission. "What happens now?" Brennan said. Fletcher, who had found the file fragments, who had read Sierra Ghost in redacted text, and then watched her executed in real time, and was still assembling the two things into something coherent, said the only honest answer he had. "Now the people who buried her 6 years ago find out she's still here, and still doing exactly what they tried to make her stop doing." He let that sit for a moment. Then he added, "And then things get complicated." The convoy cleared the mountain pass at 0847 hours. 43 vehicles, every single one of them. The confirmation came through the radio array in the relay structure in a brief transmission from the convoy commander that said nothing except "Tango route clear, all elements accounted for, Stinger delivery confirmed," and then went silent. Kate wrote the time in her notebook, 0847, and let it rest open for a moment, her hand on the page, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. That was the mission. That was what all of it had been for. The insertion, the defensive position, the firefight, the 7 rounds in 9 seconds. Everything. 43 trucks full of missiles that would change the tactical balance in this sector of a war that was ending but hadn't ended yet. Missiles that would reach the Mujahideen fighters who needed them. Missiles that would make Soviet helicopter pilots think twice before providing close air support to ground forces. Missiles that would save lives by creating a deterrent that made certain kinds of attacks too costly to attempt. She opened her eyes and reached for the radio handset to transmit the post-operation report to battalion, the standard after-action summary that every defensive position filed when a contact ended and the immediate threat had passed. That was when a different voice came through the encrypted channel instead, direct and without preamble, the way senior officers spoke when they were not calling to congratulate anyone. Relay Post Echo Ridge, this is Battalion 6 Actual. I need to speak with your augment directly. Put her on. Reardon was standing 3 feet away. He had been there for the last 20 minutes, coordinating the perimeter reset, the casualty evacuation preparation, the damage assessment. He heard the transmission. His eyes found Kate's immediately, and what passed between them in that half-second was not a conversation, but contained one. She had known this was coming. She had known it since the first contact, since the moment the shot on the Soviet machine gun made the kind of noise that traveled through command channels faster than radio waves. She had known it since Fletcher found the file fragments, and Blackwell showed them to Reardon, and the circle of people who knew what Sierra Ghost meant started expanding beyond her control. She took the handset. This is Ashford, Private First Class. The voice on the other end was measured and careful, in a way that told Kate the speaker had already been briefed, had already made calls, had already spent part of the last 2 hours in conversations that Kate was not party to, but could map from context. Private Ashford, this is Colonel Patricia Brennan, Battalion 6. I've been looking at the contact reports from the last 6 hours. I've also been looking at a network access log that shows someone ran a personnel query through the administrative node at approximately 0130 hours. Fletcher, standing near the entrance, went very still. I'm aware, ma'am, Kate said. I imagine you are. I also imagine you're aware that what that search returned is classified at a level that most of the people in your current unit don't have clearance to access. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Did you authorize that search? Kate looked at Fletcher. He met her eyes. His face was neutral, but his hands had stopped moving, and that was its own answer. He hadn't meant to expose her. He had been trying to understand who he was fighting beside. But the network error had done what network errors do. It had turned a quiet search into a logged event that traveled up the chain until someone with enough clearance noticed. No, ma'am, Kate said. I did not authorize it. Brennan was quiet for 3 seconds. The after-action reports described tactical assessments, language intercepts, and precision engagement results that are inconsistent with your listed qualifications. They also describe actions taken without authorization on multiple occasions. Before I write a single word of an official report, I want to hear your account directly, not from your chain of command. From you. My account is in the contact reports, ma'am. Your account of the engagement is in the contact reports. I'm asking about your account of yourself, who you are, what you're doing at Echo Ridge with a blank file, and why I have 3 separate position leaders telling me you saved this entire operation. Kate looked at the radio. Then she put the handset in Reardon's palm and stood up and walked to the entrance of the relay structure and stood in the light that was coming through the doorway because the sun was up now, fully up, burning the night off the mountains with the indifferent efficiency of a new day that did not care what the previous one had cost. Reardon raised the handset. Colonel Brennan, this is Lieutenant Colonel Reardon. I can speak to Private First Class Ashford's performance during this engagement directly and on the record. Do that, Colonel. He did. It took 4 minutes and he did not soften any of it. The bird patterns that predicted the observation post, the frequency intercepts that decoded the assault plan, the tactical assessment that identified the southeastern approach as the main effort when every instinct he had said it was the north. The shot that killed the Soviet machine gunner at 643 meters in complete darkness. The southeastern position, the reorganization under fire, the 7 rounds that broke an assault element and held a perimeter that should have collapsed. He said all of it in the flat, specific language of a field officer making an official statement, because the truth needed to be in the record, and he was not going to be the person who let it disappear into bureaucratic language that made everything smaller and less significant than it actually was. When he finished, Brennan was quiet for longer than the previous silences. Then she said, "Colonel Reardon, is Private First Class Ashford currently present?" "She's at the entrance, ma'am." "Tell her I'm coming to Relay Post Echo Ridge with the relief element. Tell her I want to speak with her in person." A pause, brief but weighted. "And tell her to please still be there when I arrive." The transmission ended. Reardon walked to the entrance and stood beside Kate. The mountains in daylight were a different thing than the mountains at night. Clearer, more vast, more honest about their indifference to the small dramas that played out in the shadows of their peaks. "She's coming here," he said. "I heard. She knows who you are. She knew before she called, sir. The question is what she wants." He looked at her profile, at the way she was watching the mountains, like she was reading something in them that nobody else could see. "Are you going to run?" She turned to look at him with genuine surprise, the first genuinely surprised expression he had seen on her face. And something about that surprised him in return. The fact that the question landed as unexpected rather than considered and rejected. "No, sir," she said. "Why would I run?" "Because the last time someone with stars on their collar knew who you were, you ended up with a blank file and a rank reduction." "I ended up with that because I made a deal, sir. I chose it. Running would have been the other option, and I didn't take it then either." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not afraid of Colonel Brennan. I'm not afraid of whatever conversation is coming. I'm tired of the conversation. But tired and afraid are different things." "What are you afraid of?" She considered the question with the same honest attention she gave everything else. "Getting it wrong," she said. "Making a shot that I should have made and missing. Calling a direction that turns out to be incorrect, and watching someone get hurt because I was confident in bad information." She looked at her hands. "The authority problem, the rank problem, the chain of command problem, all of that I can manage. Getting the tactical picture wrong when people are depending on me getting it right, that's what keeps me up at night." Reardon absorbed this. It was the most she had said about herself in 30 hours, and it landed with the quiet force of something that had been true for a long time and was only now finding air. "You haven't been wrong yet," he said. "No, sir, but the math doesn't care about your previous record. Every shot is its own problem. Every assessment is its own risk. The fact that I've been right so far doesn't mean I'll be right next time." That's not how most people think about capability. Most people haven't watched someone die because they made the wrong call, sir. Once you've done that, you stop thinking about capability as something you have and start thinking about it as something you have to earn every single time you use it. He looked at her for a long moment. 35 years of military service, Korea, classified operations. He had known confident soldiers, arrogant soldiers, uncertain soldiers. He had never stood 3 feet away from someone who carried absolute capability and absolute humility in the same breath, and made them both seem like natural consequences of experience. "When Brennan gets here," he said, "I'm going to tell her the same thing I told her on the radio. You saved this operation. You saved these men. And if the system can't find a way to make room for that, then the system is wrong. With respect, sir, the system doesn't care whether it's wrong. It cares whether it's stable. And someone like me, someone who breaks orders to save people, I'm not stable. I'm unpredictable. And unpredictable is dangerous to people who need everything to follow the script." "Then maybe it's time for a new script." She looked at him, almost smiled, didn't quite. "I appreciate that, sir, but new scripts take time. And right now we have 14 hours left on this mission. That's what I'm focused on." He nodded, started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "Ashford, sir, for what it's worth, I was wrong about you. And I'm grateful I was wrong, because if I'd been right, a lot of good people would be dead right now. You weren't wrong about women in combat, sir. You just had incomplete data. Now you have more data. That's how learning works. Is it always that simple for you?" "No, sir, but it has to be, because if I make it complicated, I start second-guessing, and second-guessing in combat gets people killed." He left her there and went to coordinate the medevac for Aldridge and Kowalski, and Kate went back to the radio and resumed monitoring the Soviet frequencies. and the mountain continued its slow rotation toward midday, indifferent and eternal. Colonel Patricia Brennan arrived at 10:40 hours with the relief element and two people Kate didn't recognize, but categorized immediately from their bearing, their equipment, and the specific way they moved through the relay post's entrance without making eye contact with anyone until they found her. Special operations, unattached. The kind of unattached that meant attached to something that didn't have a public name. She was sitting beside the radio array when they came in because she had not moved from her post since the last transmission, because the post was still operational and the mission wasn't officially stood down yet, and she was not going to leave her assignment before it ended, regardless of who walked through the door. Brennan was 52, compact, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had learned to say very little and mean a great deal. She came through the entrance, saw Kate at the radio, and stopped. They looked at each other across the interior of the relay structure. "Private First Class Ashford," Brennan said. "Ma'am, the mission is stood down. The convoy is clear. You can step away from the radio." Kate checked the final transmission log, noted the time in her notebook, 10:42, made one last entry. Then she stood, squared her rifle, and waited. Brennan looked at the two unattached personnel and said, "Give us a minute." They withdrew. She crossed the interior and sat in the folding chair that had been set up near the communications array, and she looked at Kate directly. "Sierra Ghost," she said. Kate said nothing. "I've been in this uniform for 28 years, Brennan said. "I have read a lot of after-action reports. I have read the fragments of your file from 6 years ago, which I accessed through channels that I had to justify to 3 separate offices this morning." She paused. "I have never read a field report that described what those reports described. The Grenada operation. What you did to keep your team alive. The Grenada operation is classified, ma'am. I'm not talking about Grenada. I'm talking about the last 6 hours. The contact reports from Reardon and Hayes describe performance that I cannot attribute to standard military training because it isn't standard military performance. The language intercept alone, you speak Russian. You decoded their entire assault plan in real time. I speak enough Russian to understand tactical coordination, ma'am. That's not in your file. A lot of things aren't in your file. I know. That's what I'm here about." Brennan leaned forward slightly, and her voice changed, dropped the formal register, became something more direct. "I'm going to be honest with you because I think you've earned honesty more than you've earned the official version. The 2 people I brought with me are from Special Operations Command. They've been monitoring communications traffic out of this theater for the last 18 months. They've been looking for something specific." Kate's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, the way a person shifts when they've been expecting a specific piece of news and it finally arrives. "They were looking for me," she said, "not a question. Not you specifically. They were looking for operational indicators consistent with a class of capability that, according to all official records, has been inactive for 6 years." Brennan held her gaze. "You lit up every indicator they track. The first contact report, the technical engagement with the Soviet machine gun, it went up the chain within 2 hours. By the time the second contact was being fought, I had a call from a general who hasn't spoken to me directly in 14 months, asking whether the Sierra Ghost call sign had been used in my theater." The room was very quiet. Outside, the sounds of the relief element setting up their positions, the medevac helicopter inbound for Aldridge and Kowalski, the ordinary noise of a military operation continuing despite everything that had happened in the darkness. "What did you tell him?" Kate said. "I told him I was looking into it." Brennan paused. "Then I read Reardon's full report, then Hayes's. Then I called every position leader who was at Echo Ridge last night, and I asked them the same question. What happened out there?" She stopped. Every single one of them said the same thing, in different words but the same thing. "You saved us." Kate said nothing. "They want you back," Brennan said. There it was, the sentence that Kate had been waiting for since the first contact report went out, since the call sign traveled up through channels, since Fletcher ran the search and found the fragments, and the fragments found their way upward the way classified information always eventually did. "No," Kate said. Brennan blinked, just once. They haven't made the offer yet. They're going to offer full reinstatement, restoration of prior rank and qualifications, return to operational status in a classified special operations program, probably with some command or training component to make it look like career progression, instead of just undoing what they did 6 years ago. Kate looked at her directly. I know the offer because it's the same offer they made 18 months ago through a different intermediary. I declined it then. My answer is the same now. Brennan sat back. She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet she studied Kate with the focused attention of someone trying to understand a decision that was coherent from the inside and baffling from the outside. Help me understand, she said, not as a commanding officer, but as one person asking another person a genuine question. You are, by every account I have received this morning, one of the most capable combat operators I have encountered in 28 years of service. You have spent 6 years carrying a radio and following orders from officers who didn't know your name. And you are sitting here telling me you would rather continue doing that than return to the work you were trained for. I wasn't trained for it, Kate said. I was built for it. There's a difference. That's semantic. It's not semantic, ma'am. Her voice stayed level, but the weight in it increased. Being trained for something means someone taught you a skill. Being built for it means someone took everything you were and shaped it into a weapon and told you that the weapon was the only part that mattered. She paused. 6 years ago, I was a weapon. A precise, efficient, classified weapon that operated in places with no names and reported to offices with no public existence. And I was told that the mission was everything and the people were variables, acceptable losses, collateral considerations. She looked at her hands, then back at Brennan. I watched people die because I was ordered to observe and report instead of intervene. I broke that order. I saved people who would have been killed, and then I was investigated for breaking the order. You were investigated for exceeding your mission parameters. I was investigated because I reminded certain people that a weapon that makes its own decisions is a weapon they can't fully control. The words came out quiet and absolute, and they were right to be concerned, because I will always make my own decisions when the decision is between following an order and preventing a death. I cannot turn that off. I tried for 6 years, and I cannot do it. She paused again. Which means putting me back in a classified program where I am expected to be a controllable instrument is not a solution. It's a setup for the same outcome. And next time, they won't just reduce my rank. They'll court-martial me, or worse. Brennan was quiet for a long time. Outside, Reardon's voice was audible, managing the transition to the relief element, the ordinary sound of a unit completing a handover. If I file a complete and accurate after-action report, Brennan said carefully, it will force the question officially, publicly within the channels. Your performance here cannot be characterized as an augment handling communications. I cannot write that report with a straight face. Write what's true, ma'am, Kate said. You told me you were going to be honest. Be honest. The honest report brings the conversation I just described, formally, with more pressure than I can deflect. Then I'll have that conversation formally, and I'll give the same answer. Kate reached for her notebook and opened it to the page where she had written the convoy confirmation at 0847. She looked at it for a moment. 43 vehicles, every one of them. That's what last night was for. That's what I was here for. The notebook snapped shut. That's enough for me, ma'am. That's always been enough. Brennan stood up. She looked at Kate for a long moment with an expression that had moved through several phases and arrived somewhere that was not quite resolution, but was close to respect. The 2 people I brought with me are going to want to speak with you, she said. I know what you're going to tell them. Yes, ma'am. They won't like it. They didn't like it 18 months ago either. Brennan almost smiled. Didn't quite. Send them in, ma'am, Kate said. She stood, squared her rifle, met Brennan's eyes. I'll give them the same honest answer I gave you. And then I'd like to get back to my unit, because Reardon is running the handover, and Aldridge needs someone to check his field dressing before the medevac transfer, and there are still 12 hours left on this mission. Brennan looked at her for one more second. Then she turned toward the entrance and said, to no one in particular and entirely to herself, 28 years, never seen anything like it. She walked out, and behind her, In the quiet of the relay structure, Kate Ashford stood beside the radio array that had stayed operational through everything, opened her notebook to a clean page, and waited for the next conversation with the absolute, unshakable calm of someone who had already made every decision that mattered and was no longer afraid of the consequences. The two operators from Special Operations Command were named Carver and Holloway. They didn't offer ranks. They didn't offer first names. They came into the relay structure and sat down across from her with the practiced ease of people who had conducted this type of conversation many times before and believed they understood how it ended. Carver spoke first. He was the older of the two, mid-60s, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of operational work and the kind of confidence that came from always being in the position of offering something people wanted. "We've been looking for you for 18 months, he said. "I know," Kate said. "Not looking for you the way the last conversation was looking for you. That was about containment. This is different." He leaned forward slightly. "The program you left 6 years ago has changed. The leadership structure has changed. The authorization framework has changed. The people who made the decision that resulted in your separation have either retired or been reassigned." Kate looked at him steadily. "That's not what made me leave." "We know that too." He slid a folder across the surface between them. "Full reinstatement. Your previous rank restored immediately upon acceptance. Captain. Return to operational status within 30 days. Complete expungement of the investigation findings from your record." He paused for emphasis. "Everything that was taken from you, returned." Kate did not touch the folder. Holloway spoke for the first time. He was younger than Carver, maybe 50, sharper in the way of someone still collecting certainties rather than carrying them. "You saved 43 vehicles last night," he said. 43 convoys and the personnel at this position and the relay station itself. All of it on a single augment assignment with no operational authority and a blank personnel file. His voice was not unkind. "You did all of that as a private first class. Imagine what you could do with actual resources. Actual authority, actual support." "I had everything I needed," Kate said. Holloway blinked. "You had a radio and a rifle." "I had Reardon moving his fire teams when I needed them moved. I had Blackwell covering the southwestern approach without being told why. I had Harlow holding her position and trusting my call in the southeastern sector." She looked at both of them evenly. "Those aren't resources. Those are people, and I had them because they chose to trust me, not because a program authorized them to." She paused. "That's the only kind of support that actually works when everything goes wrong." Carver was quiet for a moment. He glanced at Holloway, then back at Kate, and she could see him recalibrating, reaching for a different angle, the way experienced negotiators did when the first approach didn't take. "The offer isn't just operational," Carver said. "There's a training component. You would shape the next generation of operators. Everything you know, everything you've developed, your methods, your instincts, passed forward." He paused for emphasis. "Nothing you've become dies with your service record. It becomes institutional knowledge." It was the best argument he had. Kate could see he knew it was the best argument. He had probably been saving it. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. She imagined it for a full 10 seconds, standing in front of a classroom of young operators, teaching them what she knew, watching them learn and grow and become better than they were. Then she said, "The thing I know that actually matters cannot be taught in a program. It can only be learned the way I learned it." She met Carver's eyes. "In the field, next to people whose lives depend on you getting it right, under conditions that don't ask permission before they get worse. You cannot replicate that in a training environment. You can approximate it. The approximation is useful. But what I am right now, today, in this room, is the product of every moment I was not in a classified program." She shook her head. 6 years of regular service, real units, real operations, soldiers who didn't know who I was, and therefore treated me like exactly what I appeared to be." She looked at her hands. "That's where I became better than I was 6 years ago. Not despite the demotion, because of it." The silence that followed was the silence of a room where a final answer has been given, and everyone present knows it. Carver picked up the folder. He looked at it for a moment, Then he set it back down on the table, not in front of her this time, just set it down between them. "The general is going to ask me what happened here," he said. "What do you want me to tell him?" "Tell him the truth," Kate said. "Tell him Private First Class Ashford declined reinstatement and requested to return to her unit." She stood, squared her rifle. "And tell him the relay station is secure and the convoy cleared the route. Tell him the mission was completed." She walked out. Reardon was waiting outside, not pacing, just standing the way he stood when he was thinking hard about something and needed to do it upright. He saw her face and knew immediately. "You said no." "Yes, sir." "They'll come back, higher up the chain." "Let them, sir." She looked toward the perimeter where the relief element was completing the handover, and her platoon was beginning to consolidate for extraction. "How long until the helicopters?" she asked. 40 minutes. He fell into step beside her as she walked toward the southeastern position to check on Aldridge one more time before the medevac arrived. "Ashford." "Sir." "Kate," he said, using her first name deliberately, the way people use names when they want you to hear that they're using it. "I owe you more than a professional acknowledgement. I treated you like a problem for 12 hours. Like an administrative inconvenience. I dismissed 3 accurate assessments and nearly got people killed because of it." "You've said that, sir." "I haven't finished saying it." He stopped walking. She stopped too. He looked at her directly. "When I was a young lieutenant in Korea, my company commander told me the most dangerous thing in a combat unit was an officer who believed his rank made him correct. I spent 35 years thinking that was wisdom I had absorbed. Last night showed me I hadn't absorbed it as well as I thought." He paused. "You were right. I was wrong, and I'm going to carry that." She looked at him for a moment. "You moved when I gave you the window, sir," she said. "After the machine gun went down. You could have frozen. You could have argued. You had every institutional reason to override my call and hold to your original perimeter assessment. You didn't. That's not a small thing, Colonel. That's the thing that made the difference." He nodded slowly. Then he said something she didn't expect. "Will you request a permanent transfer to this unit?" She looked at him. The question was real, not perfunctory. "I go where I'm assigned, sir." "I know, but assignments can be requested. I can put in a request from my end." Hayes said he would support it. He paused. "You belong with people who know what you are and have decided that's not a problem. You've spent 6 years in units that didn't know. Let us be the unit that does." She stood with that for a moment. Not the formal offer of reinstatement that Carver and Holloway had brought. Not the restoration of rank and call sign and classified status. Just one colonel asking one soldier to stay with the people who had learned to trust her. It hit her somewhere deeper than the official offer had. She couldn't have explained why, except that it was honest in a way that the folder on the table had not been honest, and she had spent enough time around dishonest things to feel the difference physically. "I'll think about it, sir," she said, which for her was almost yes. Fletcher found her 20 minutes before extraction, sitting alone at the edge of the perimeter, facing out, watching the approaches with the quiet vigilance that was simply her natural state of being in a place where threats were possible. He sat down beside her without asking. She had come to expect that from him. It no longer felt like intrusion. It felt like the specific weight of someone who had decided you were worth the proximity. "Brennan wants to apologize to you," he said. "For what?" "He called you a CIA secretary on the insertion. He told me this morning. Said it's been sitting on him since the firefight." She looked toward the perimeter where Brennan was visible at his assigned position, back straight, weapon correctly oriented, doing his job with the solid reliability she had noted in him from the first patrol. "He doesn't owe me an apology," she said. "He covered your left flank without knowing why," Fletcher said. "When I said cover her, he moved. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate." He paused. "That's its own apology. Better than words, I think." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell him we're good," she said. "He'll want to hear it from you." "Then I'll tell him before we load." She looked at the horizon where the sun was climbing toward noon, burning off the last of the morning shadows. "Fletcher, yeah, the search you ran, the file fragments. I'm not angry about it." "I know, but I should have asked." "You should have," she agreed. "And if you'd asked, I would have said no. And then we would have had 12 more hours of Reardon treating me like a communications problem and Hayes dismissing everything I said. She paused. So I'm not angry, but don't do it again. Never again, he said. They sat for a moment in the easy quiet of people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space between them. What happens to you now? He said. I go back to base. I write my section of the contact reports. I clean my rifle. I wait for the next assignment. That's the job. He shook his head slowly. You know what I keep thinking about? The file said you saved 8 operators in Grenada, 37 confirmed kills in 14 hours. You were 20 years old. Yes. Those 8 people, they're alive because of you. They went home. They have lives, families, futures. All of it because you chose them over the order. She said nothing. And they investigated you for it, he continued. And here you are, 6 years later, still making the same choices, still getting the same results, and still being offered deals instead of recognition. The system works the way it works, she said. It shouldn't. No, she agreed. It shouldn't. But those 8 operators from Grenada are alive, and 43 truck drivers went home last night, and Aldridge is going to keep his leg, and Harlow's team survived. She picked up a small stone and held it, feeling its weight. The system can work however it works. The outcomes are what they are. Fletcher looked at her for a long moment. You really don't need the recognition, do you? I really don't. How? She looked at him. Because recognition is for other people, she said simply. It's for the people watching. It makes them feel the accounting is correct, that the right things got acknowledged and the ledger balances. But the people who were in the southeastern position last night, they don't need a report to tell them what happened. Harlow knows. Aldridge knows. Brennan knows. She paused. You know. That's the only ledger that matters. The helicopters came in at 12:40 hours. 2 aircraft, medical evacuation for Aldridge and Kowalski, and transport for the rest of the platoon. Reardon managed the loading with the efficient calm of a man who had run 100 of these rotations and knew that the job wasn't done until the last boot lifted off the ground. Kate was the last one to the helicopter, not performing it, not making a statement, just the way she moved through things, checking the position one final time, ensuring the relief element had what they needed, spending 30 seconds at the radio array confirming the encryption keys had been transferred correctly. Hayes was at the helicopter door when she approached. He held out his hand. She shook it. The report I file will be accurate, he said over the rotor noise. Not adequate. Accurate. Whatever that means for you going forward. It means someone told the truth, sir, Kate said. That's worth something. It's worth more than something. He met her eyes. You were asked for your call sign at the beginning of this operation, and you didn't give one. If I ask you now, what would you say? She thought about it. The helicopter noise around them, the wash of the rotors, the heat and the smell of aviation fuel, and the weight of everything the last 30 hours had been. She thought about a call sign that was supposed to be dead and buried, and had turned out to be neither. She thought about what she had told Carver when he offered to give it back officially, with rank and program and classified status attached. She had said no to all of that. She had said it wasn't who she was anymore. But standing at the helicopter door with Hayes, looking at her, and Reardon visible over his shoulder, and Fletcher and Harlow and Brennan already inside, she understood that the answer she had given in the relay structure was only half the truth. Sierra Ghost wasn't the program. Sierra Ghost wasn't the rank or the classification level or the commendation that had been offered and withdrawn. Sierra Ghost was the moment you chose the person over the order. It was the decision made in the space between an instruction and a conscience. It was the shot taken when the authorization wasn't coming and the window was closing and someone was going to die if you waited. That didn't belong to a program. It had never belonged to a program. It belonged to her. Ashford, she said. My call sign is Ashford. Hayes looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was the smile of a man who understood completely and thought it was exactly right. She climbed in. Brennan was across from her inside the helicopter. He caught her eye immediately, the way people catch the eye of someone they owe something to and haven't paid yet. She could see him working up to the words, the apology Fletcher had told her about, the one that had been sitting on him since the boat. She held up 2 fingers, a small gesture. Then she pointed at him, then at herself. Then she shook her head once. "We're good." His face went through something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite gratitude, but was in the neighborhood of both. He nodded and looked away, and she could see something settle in him, the specific relaxation of a weight being set down. The helicopters lifted. Base in 40 minutes. After that, reports and debriefs and the institutional machinery of after-action processing. After that, the question of assignment and what Reardon's request would produce, and what Carver would tell his general, and what Brennan's honest report would set in motion. All of that was coming. She knew it was coming, and she was not afraid of it. She looked out the helicopter door at the mountains falling away below them. Relay station Echo Ridge visible on its ridge for a few seconds before the distance swallowed it. Somewhere down in those mountains, the Soviet militia was regrouping, assessing, planning the next operation. Somewhere in those valleys, the 43 trucks were completing their route, their crews unaware of what had happened at Echo Ridge to keep the path clear. Somewhere, in a place she would never see, the 8 operators from Grenada were living the lives she had saved. One of them had a son now, she'd heard through unofficial channels. Another was teaching at West Point. A third was running a program in Central America. They were alive because she had chosen them. The helicopter banked. The mountains disappeared behind clouds. She reached into her pocket and found the small stone she had picked up at the perimeter, the one she had held while talking to Fletcher. She held it in her palm and felt its weight and thought about the question Fletcher had asked her. "What are you afraid of?" "Getting it wrong," she had told him. "Missing a shot that needed to hit. Calling a direction and being wrong when lives depended on being right." That was the truth. It would always be the truth. The thing about carrying real capability was that the weight of it didn't diminish with experience. It increased. Every person you kept alive added to the count, and the count added to the weight. And the weight was the price of doing it right. She was willing to pay it. She had always been willing to pay it. That was the only thing about herself she had never doubted. Aldridge was strapped onto the medical litter 2 feet away, conscious now, better than he had been, his color returning with the IV fluids the medic had started. He caught her looking at him. "Hey," he said over the rotor noise. "Hey, I'm going to ask you something and I want an honest answer." "Okay. Were you scared out there? Any of it?" She thought about it. The roof of the relay structure, the southeastern position in the dark with the assault team at 60 meters, and Harlow's element at 4 effectives. 7 shots, 6 confirmed, 1 corrected. The specific math of a moment where the margin was thin enough to feel. "Yes," she said. Aldridge looked surprised. She could see he had expected a different answer. "Good scared," she said. "The kind that makes you sharper, not the kind that makes you freeze." She met his eyes. "If I wasn't scared, I wouldn't be paying attention. And if I wasn't paying attention, you and I wouldn't be on this helicopter." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, the words barely audible over the helicopter noise, "Thank you." Just that. No elaboration, no drama. Just a 22-year-old soldier saying, "Thank you," to the woman who had kept him alive, in the plain and unguarded way of someone who understands that the plainest words are sometimes the only ones that fit. She nodded once. She looked back out the door. The mountains below had become foothills. The foothills would soon become plains. And somewhere in that vast transition, the Cold War was ending, though nobody knew it yet. The Berlin Wall would fall in 9 months. The Soviet Union would dissolve in 2 years. And the Stinger missiles that 43 trucks had delivered would become one small piece of a much larger story about how empires crumbled and new orders rose. But none of that mattered to Kate Ashford in this moment. What mattered was that Aldridge was going to keep his leg, that Harlow's team had held, that Reardon had learned to listen, that Fletcher had found the courage to trust, that Brennan had overcome his assumptions. What mattered was that she had made the right calls when it counted, and people were alive because of it, and that was enough. It had always been enough. She closed her eyes and felt the helicopter's vibration through the frame, steady and mechanical and reliable. Felt the stone in her palm, a small piece of a mountain that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. And she thought about the next mission, the next position, the next moment when the window would open and the shot would have to be made and no authorization would come in time. She would be ready. She was always ready. That was never going to change. The helicopter flew on through the brightening day, carrying soldiers home from a battle that most of them would remember for the rest of their lives, and that history would never record, toward a future that none of them could see, but all of them had helped make possible. And Kate Ashford, private first class, no call sign required, opened her notebook one final time and wrote, "Mission complete. 43 vehicles delivered. 0 friendly KIA. Echo Ridge held. Call sign, Ashford. Authorization, not required. Never was." She let the page rest open for a moment, then closed the leather cover and tucked it away. She looked out at the sky one last time. The soldiers around her, Harlow checking medical supplies, Fletcher securing his gear, Brennan staring at mountains with new respect, Reardon standing watch over them all. They didn't need her full story. They had lived the part that mattered. The helicopter crossed into friendly airspace. Routine radio chatter resumed, and somewhere in a classified filing cabinet, a report was being written with one simple truth. Private First Class Kate Ashford saved 43 convoys, 1 relay station, and every soldier at Echo Ridge. Not because she was Sierra Ghost, because she was Ashford, and Ashford was enough.